Stadiums packed with 70,000 screaming fans, blinding pyrotechnics cutting through the night sky, riders launching off massive ramps 40 feet into the air, completely separated from their dirt bikes, their bodies twisted into positions that had no business existing on a 250-pound machine. This was the early 2000s, and what you're watching was not the pinnacle of motorsports, at least not according to the old guard. While freestyle motocross was becoming the most watched, most talked about spectacle in action sports, the traditional racing world was watching its entire culture get swallowed whole by a crowd that no longer cared about lap times. So how is it that a group of desert rebels hijack an entire sport? And more importantly, did they really ruin it? By the mid-90s, racing had one job: win. Factory teams backed by Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki controlled the money. Elite riders commanded multi-year, multi-million-dollar contracts. Team managers didn't want showmen. They wanted athletes who crossed finish lines faster than everybody else. Showboating wasn't frowned upon. It was a career liability. The culture was rigid, the hierarchy was clear, and, at its outermost edges, completely invisible to anyone running a factory team. Something else was already happening. Riders had been heading to the dunes and hills of Southern California for years, not to race, but to see how far they could fly through the air. Crusty demons of dirt put it on tape in 1995, and a generation of kids who'd never touched a motocross magazine found it instantly compelling. But it was still underground. That was about to change. Jeremy McGrath didn't set out to start freestyle. He broke something. In the mid-90s, inside a Supercross stadium that was supposed to be about precision and lap times, McGrath threw a BMX-style knack-knack over a jump. One leg kicked off the bike, completely unnecessary and completely off script. By today's standards, it barely registers, but back then, it did not belong. And the reaction told you where this was going. The crowd didn't respond to the pass, they didn't react to the lap time, they reacted to the moment in the air. For the first time, the loudest sound in the stadium wasn't tied to winning, it was tied to style.
Right, and so that was kind of my nature in Supercross. Like, I brought this BMX style that kind of like the Guy Coopers and the Jeff Stantons and even the Bradshaws, who we all looked up to. Those are the Ricky Johnson, David Bailey, Johnny O'Mara, Jeff Ward, all those dudes. Back then, the idea of bringing a BMX style to Supercross, it really didn't exist. Everyone was trying to get as much air as possible, as much style as they could get, right? And I mean, if you look back now, I'm not even sure how they really made their time on the track. It's pretty funny. I don't know. So when that style kind of came in, it was like, all right, cool, this is a whole different style. But then I started winning races. Started winning a lot of races. I was like, okay, well.
Then Brian Deegan made it impossible to ignore. Brian Deegan, a young privateer racer who had just won the 125 Supercross main event, did something no rider had ever done on that stage. He ghost rode his bike across the finish line, launching it into the air while he stood on the ground with his hands raised. AMA officials were stunned. Racing purists were furious. The crowd went completely berserk. That last moment didn't just cross a line, it exposed one.
Down, the checkered flag, and Deegan lets his bike fly into the air. Standing with his arms in the air, Deegan just launched his bike off the finish line, jump put by Kenny Watt.
Later that year, Deegan and Larry Linkogel would form Metal Mulisha, turning that same mindset into something much bigger than a single race. The message was clear: reject the corporate racing model entirely and replace it with something rawer and more dangerous.
The Metal Mulisha, I'd say, didn't really exist when I was racing. It was something toward the end of my road with racing. We were doing tricks on dirt bikes when we were practicing, and that's how freestyle started forming. And the videos started coming out like Crusty Demons of Dirt, Moto Triple X, like these action sport videos showing our characters. And I feel like, at that point, that's when we started separating from motocross into freestyle.
At the same time, Mike Metzger was already building what that would look like. Riders across Southern California were carving jumps into hillsides and desert lines, chasing height, distance, and whatever they could get away with in the air. Just repetition, crashes, and the constant push to go bigger than the last guy. The fringe was getting louder. The mainstream was starting to notice. Everyone knew what the ceiling was, the backflip, the one trick the establishment was certain couldn't be done on a real motorcycle. At the 2000 Gravity Games, Carey Hart attempted it. He crashed on the landing, but the attempt alone restructured what the sport believed was physically possible. The psychological ceiling had been punched through.
Leading into Gravity Games that year, probably about 2 months before, and now, now I'm kind of flipping a little bit more at TJ's house, like keeping it consistent. I'm like, well, fuck, might as well just send it at the biggest contest of the year. I mean, at that point, there's no foam pits, so all you can do is visualize it.
Yeah.
And you know how it is. Like, you fixate on something, it'll start to drive you fucking crazy.
2 years later, at the 2002 X Games, Mike Metzger landed it clean in competition and rode away. The floodgates had opened, and the world's biggest sports network was paying very close attention. Once the backflip was possible, everything changed. What had been untouchable was now expected. Landing one wasn't enough anymore. You had to add something to it. Twist it, stretch it, hold it longer, make it look bigger than the last guy. Progression didn't slow down. It sped up, and the crashes came with it. Bigger tricks meant harder landings, and the line between what riders could survive and what the crowd wanted kept getting thinner. The sport was moving faster than anyone could control. That doesn't last.
When I was filming the backflips for ESPN leading up to X Games, and where I had the hay bale on the landing, and I ended up like coming up short twice after I did the first one, and then all the ESPN cameramen were like, dude, we didn't even have our cameras on. And I'm like, well, get ready. And then I went out and I did 2 more. I clipped the hay bales, ate crap. Luckily, I was wearing my my full
It was
armor.
like turtle suit, Alpine Star suit or something, right?
Yeah. And then after that, I removed the hay bales and I did 2 more. So that first day, I did 3 flips out of 5. 2 I crashed. And then the next day, I was pretty sore.
ESPN's X Games had already built legitimate competitive platforms for skateboarding and BMX, and in 1999, Moto X made its debut. Freestyle motocross didn't become dangerous because of a television deal. It was already out of control. The X Games just pointed a broadcast camera at it and turned up the volume. At that inaugural 1999 event, a 15-year-old named Travis Pastrana won the freestyle gold medal. The sport had its prodigy, and it had its platform.
Glad ESPN's given motocross a chance to be at the X Games.
Want to go riding? He's just a kid. He's a little guy. Look at the Indian there with the Superman sea crab. That is it. That is the stuff right there.
Travis Pastrana, first gold, first time for Freestyle Moto X.
The X Games, it's just the biggest event probably for extreme sports in the entire world.
The X Games format was built for maximum immediate impact. Big air, best trick, and structured freestyle runs scored riders on trick difficulty, amplitude, extension, and style. You didn't need to understand a suspension setup or a corner rut to get it. A human being on a motorcycle, 40 feet in the air. That language was universal, and millions of viewers who'd never watched a motocross race tuned in. And riders didn't stay at one backflip for very long. They started stacking variations onto it. Heel clickers, seat grabs, Cordovas, turning the trick into something bigger, cleaner, and harder to ignore. It didn't stay a breakthrough, it turned into a target. On live television in front of a mainstream audience, riders were already pushing it past the version that had just broken through. Then came 2006, and the moment that made it official. Travis Pastrana executed the first double backflip in X Games competition in front of a packed stadium and a television audience reaching upwards of 15 million viewers across networks. Journalists who had never touched a motorsport story were writing about it. Sports anchors who covered football and basketball were running the clip. FMX wasn't fighting for mainstream recognition anymore. It was the mainstream. Racing was the old one scrambling for space. But peaks don't hold. The double backflip had been done. The question of what was physically possible had been answered, and the answer had been delivered live on national television.
So it was really difficult to get a double backflip around. And like I said, 8 for 10. So I rock, paper, scissors. I seriously do this with like one of my friends, Hubert, and like literally didn't know because everyone's telling me not to. Again, I feel like I'm the only person in the world that everyone's like, what are you doing? Don't do it. Your life's good. Like, why on earth are you risking everything for, And so I rock, paper, scissors, and Hubert won. And he's like, winners.
The trick stayed. The variations kept coming. But the moment of genuine shock, the first time a mass audience had no framework for what they were seeing, that moment had passed. Novelty has a ceiling, and FMX had touched it. The sport didn't collapse. The industry started looking for the next thing. And while all that was happening, The single greatest motocross racer in the history of the sport had already put together the most statistically dominant seasons ever, and almost nobody outside the paddock knew his name. Ricky Carmichael is universally recognized in motocross circles as the GOAT. Not a debate, not an informal nickname, a title backed by numbers that belong alongside the greatest performances in any professional sport. In the same years that freestyle was exploding across ESPN, Carmichael had already completed perfect 24-0 seasons in the Outdoor Motocross Championship, one of the most complete performances in competitive motorsports history. Grueling tracks, brutal outdoor conditions, the deepest professional field the sport had ever assembled. He went undefeated, and the cameras were pointed somewhere else. A single 15-second clip of an FMX rider landing a new backflip variation generated more mainstream media coverage than Carmichael's entire season combined.
And go even faster.
Oh, Ricky Carmichael to the inside. Number 4, the defending champion Ricky Carmichael, who won here last year, moves into the lead.
And that wasn't a coincidence. It was the attention economy at work, and it was brutal for the racing world. Racing had always lived inside the motocross magazines, deep dive race reports, technical bike tests, and detailed suspension analysis. By 1999, Freerider MX had launched to cover FMX riders as cultural figures rather than athletes, and it built a dedicated audience that had no interest in crossing back into race coverage. The attention didn't split, it migrated. Video games accelerated the same drift. Freestyle motocross, McGrath versus Pastrana, reached a generation of consumers who had never watched a race and had no reason to start. It wasn't selling a sport, it was selling a personality. Long-form race broadcasts asked for 2 hours of your attention and a working knowledge of track conditions and rider strategy. A freestyle clip asked for nothing, except a willingness to watch something insane. In the fragmented media environment of the early 2000s, that asymmetry was not recoverable. Roger DeCoster, one of the most respected figures in the sport's history and a Hall of Fame team manager, publicly argued that placing professional motocross in the extreme sports category actively undermined the legitimacy and sacrifice of the sport's elite racers. To the advertising agencies and television networks who had already decided where to point the cameras, it was a moot argument. The ramp was more compelling than the starting gate. The audience had made the call. A factory racer who consistently finished in the top 5 across a 29-race season was a reliable, disciplined professional. An FMX rider with a magnetic personality and the willingness to perform on command was an entertainment property. Those two things were not being valued equally anymore. Everyone in the sport knew it, and nobody in racing knew how to fight it. The commercial shift was inseparable from a cultural transformation that reshaped the sport's identity from the outside in. The traditional motocross pit had been a place of primary colors, motorcycle logos, corporate uniformity, and media-trained professionalism. By the early 2000s, it looked like an entirely different world. Metal Mulisha's visual identity, built on skulls, black denim, aggressive iconography, and the explicit rejection of everything the AMA stood for, had spread from Brian Deegan's immediate circle into a multi-million-dollar apparel empire. The brand weaponized anti-establishment sentiment and sold it back to a generation that was starving for exactly that. Fans weren't buying a t-shirt, they were buying a rejection of the conventional world, and the conventional world of motocross was the most convenient target. The early 2000s saw that outlaw, biker-inspired look go mainstream. Trucker hats, loud graphics, tattoo-style designs. What used to live on the edges was suddenly everywhere. Brands like Von Dutch blew up in pop culture, and that same aggressive style started bleeding into MMA and action sports. The motocross pit absorbed all of it. Flat-brimmed hats, heavy silver jewelry, black jeans, and graphic-heavy apparel replaced the clean-cut corporate presentation of the previous decade. FMX athletes were not expected to thank their suspension technicians on a podium. They were expected to be brash, entertaining, and completely unapologetic about it. The expectation created a feedback loop that extended even into the racing paddock. Fans began demanding personality from athletes who'd previously been evaluated almost entirely on their technical performance. The most common, commercially successful riders of the era were increasingly those who could generate attention, not just podium finishes. Into this space stepped the energy drink industry with near-perfect timing. Chevrolet had exited its motorsport sponsorships around 2004 as its marketing strategy shifted. The Camel tobacco money that had propped up Supercross through the 1980s and into the 1990s had been driven out by federal advertising regulations years before that. The gap left was enormous. Monster Energy, Red Bull, and Rockstar moved aggressively to fill it. They recognized that the adrenaline-saturated, hyper-aggressive culture of FMX was the ideal vehicle to reach young male demographics who responded to extreme risk and outlaw identity. Their sponsorship dollars weren't just advertising placements, they were culture purchases. MTV's Nitro Circus, built around Travis Pastrana and his crew, completed the circle. FMX riders were now appearing on mainstream entertainment television alongside musicians and reality TV personalities. Fans wanted to drink what these riders endorsed, wear what they wore, and adopt the mythology of the lifestyle. The cultural absorption of freestyle into the mainstream had run its full course, and traditional racing was left negotiating how to remain visible inside a sport whose image had been completely rewritten around it. For all the magazine covers and MTV appearances and energy drink millions, the financial structure of the sport told a different, sobering story. The factory racing teams never lost their economic grip. Honda, Yamaha, Kawasaki, and Suzuki still commanded the vast majority of the industry's actual operating capital throughout the entire FMX boom. Supercross attendance never declined during the freestyle era. The series consistently drew more than 800,000 fans annually, eventually peaking above 831,000 in 2012, even in years when top riders were sidelined by injury. The freestyle spectacle was extremely loud. Racing was the foundation keeping the industry operational. The financial reality for most FMX riders, outside of a very small elite tier, was substantially harsher than the media image suggested. Freestyle's infrastructure lacked the week-to-week earning consistency of a 29-race AMA season. Athletes were almost entirely dependent on isolated invitation-only events like the X Games, the Gravity Games, and sporadic stunt show touring schedules. Without factory-level mechanical support, FMX riders absorbed immense personal costs, funding their own motorcycles, travel, and healthcare in a gig economy built on deliberate physical extremity. The injury rate was catastrophic. The average elite FMX career was terrifyingly short. Even the founders of the freestyle movement eventually sought the stability of structured competition. Travis Pastrana transitioned significant portions of his late career into four-wheeled racing, the U.S. National Rally Championship, NASCAR, and the Daytona 500.
We're in the 500. So cool. I tell you what, qualifying for the 500, this is literally a dream come true.
Brian Deegan followed a strikingly similar arc, converting his extreme sports celebrity into a championship-winning career in Lucas Oil Pro 2 Unlimited off-road truck racing and rallycross.
Now we had a battle there between McGrath and RJ Anderson.
The riders who had most loudly declared war on structured competition ultimately found they couldn't survive long-term without it. But what freestyle permanently changed cannot be walked back. Before the FMX explosion, a professional dirt bike rider's commercial value was determined almost entirely by their position in the point standings. Freestyle proved with undeniable commercial evidence that personality, visual identity, and the ability to generate a single transcendent moment could command equal or greater commercial value than a string of championships. This proved to be an almost prophetic anticipation of the digital media era. A 30-minute outdoor moto, however technically extraordinary, is nearly impossible to package for viral consumption. A 15-second clip of a rider executing a new combination trick translates perfectly to the attention spans and scroll behavior of the modern internet audience. FMX conditioned the global motocross fan base to consume the sport as a series of spectacular, isolated highlights, and that conditioning never reversed. Modern Supercross reflects this directly. Today's riders throw massive stylized whips over the finish line and execute crowd-facing celebrations that would have generated fines or managerial reprimands in the 1980s. The pit aesthetic remains heavily influenced by the loud, graphic-driven fashion culture of the FMX boom years. Energy drink companies still bankroll the competitive field. Podcasts like Gypsy Tales and The Whiskey Throttle Show dedicate hours of long-form content to conversations with Jeremy McGrath, Brian Deegan, and Carey Hart, which proves the fascination with this era remains fully embedded in the sport's identity, not as nostalgia, but as an ongoing debate that never quite got resolved. The freestyle era forced motocross to attempt something its traditional culture had spent decades resisting. it operates inside the entertainment industry. Racing still defines the history, the discipline, and the structural career paths of the sport. Championships still shape legacies, and factory contracts still hold the majority of the financial power. But the definition of what makes a dirt bike rider a genuine superstar in the eyes of anyone beyond the hardcore racing community never fully returned to the pre-1999 standard. Racing kept the lights on. Freestyle is the reason anyone outside the paddock cared enough to look. Whether that trade-off was worth it is a question the sport still hasn't settled, and probably never will. Drop a comment below and tell me where you stand. Was freestyle the best or worst thing to ever happen to motocross? And if you want to stay in this world a little longer, click the video on screen now. Thanks for watching, and stay wicked.